911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was level, but the woman on the other end of the phone was hysterical. There's something suspicious going on across from my house, she snapped. I think they're stocking chemicals, hazardous ones, and it's seeping into the neighborhood's water supply. That woman's name was Karen, and as she gave her statement, she pointed straight at a big metal tank I'd installed just a few days before on my ranch. I was nearby, checking some pipe valves around my windmill, oblivious that my quiet day was going to be ruined. In a matter of minutes, I heard the echo of sirens, and before I even had a chance to react, flashing red and blue lights filled the space around my tank. We've had a report of toxic chemicals on your property, he stated. I remained speechless. You've got to be joking, I replied, removing my work gloves. But Karen stepped forward, arms crossed, looking like she was issuing a royal proclamation. She's been keeping hazardous chemicals in that tank, she snapped. What if my son inhales something poisonous? Twice. And then politely, I approached the officer. You may want to inspect the credentials on this tank, I said. The deputy's eyebrow shot up. And you are? That tank contains emergency backup water, and it's completely approved by the Department of Water Resources. You'd like to know who signed off on it? I did. The officer remained silent, and Karen's face went white. But this wasn't over. Oh no, it was only the beginning. Then, out of nowhere, another officer came forward and addressed Karen. Ma'am, is this the same tank that you attempted to climb into with a stick 15 minutes earlier? That was when the entire house of cards collapsed. But let's go back and give things some perspective. This didn't begin with Karen calling 911. No, it started way earlier with a smile, a welcome basket, and the straightforward addition of a ranch gate. I relocated to Cedar Valley 3 months ago, retiring early after 27 years of service as a regional water inspector. My name is Robert Walker. I was 54 and living a dream life of peace and distance from the chaos of urban existence. I purchased the Walker Ranch, a small 10-acre property just at the outskirts of town. It was an old property requiring work, the well pump was out, the fencing had gaps, and the barn needed repair, but it suited me just fine. It was quirky and peaceful. There was Karen. She was the HOA president for Cedar Heights, a recently built, overdeveloped complex next door. She wasn't accustomed to the likes of me, a rancher who enjoyed space and quiet, rather than well-groomed lawns and HOA bylaws. It was 2 weeks since I'd moved in when she appeared in a gleaming silver SUV, heels and sundress that let out a plaintive cry of out of place on gritty ranch roads. Hi, I'm Karen Lewis, president of the Cedar Heights HOA. Welcome to the neighborhood, she said, presenting me with a gift basket. I peeked inside, scented candles, pamphlets, and a Cedar Heights HOA welcome packet. I wasn't among her neighborhood though, so I politely declined. Thanks, but I'm not in the HOA, I said. Well, technically, you're just outside the borders, but we consider this entire valley a community we share. We like to keep things at standards. Maybe you'd consider joining our HOA? I laughed, wiping sweat from my forehead. I appreciate the invite, but I think I'll pass. That was the last time Karen ever smiled at me. After that, she made it her duty to stalk my property. She would cruise slowly by, pulling over to take pictures, always faking a check of her phone. The actual trouble started when I put up the water tank, a 5,000-gallon steel tank at the rear of my barn, part of a fully approved water system. But to Karen it appeared suspicious. 2 days post its installation, I caught her again, prowling around my compound, camera in hand. Karen, do you need some help? I asked, approaching her. She recoiled, her face flushed. Oh, I was just looking at your structure, she replied. It's a water tank, I explained calmly. For my crops. She didn't believe me. We're hearing rumors. They say you're holding gray water. That's against the law. Karen, I told her sternly, I'm a state water inspector. I've looked at hundreds of tanks like this. It's legal, it's permitted, and it's not your concern. She whirled and stomped off, heels sinking into the earth, but I wasn't done with her yet. It just kept building from there. I'd have my neighbors, such as Jake the cattle farmer and Miss Carla, who had sunflowers planted all over her yard, come to me and report on Karen's latest transgressions. But this was just the beginning of the actual showdown. Stay tuned as the tension continues to build in the battle between me and Karen, the HOA president who just couldn't mind her own business. Would this become the ultimate test of my resolve and my ability to protect what I'd worked so hard for? You won't want to miss the sequel to this wacky drama. I'd heard whispers that Karen was warning people about my toxic tank, but I didn't believe them. One night, Jake stopped by with a couple of beers and said, Rob, I heard she complained to the county. Be careful. What I didn't know, however, was that Karen would take it so far as to fake a chemical emergency. And she didn't do it quietly either. The day everything blew up, I found myself gripping my badge as the police officers called in their command. They needed verification. One of the deputies remained to cordon off the scene, and there was Karen standing behind him, smiling in triumph as if she'd just won something. "I knew you couldn't keep this under wraps any longer," she sneered. I did a double take at her, totally unfazed. "Karen, you've just made the most monumental mistake of your HOA career," I said to myself. The walkie-talkie on my belt suddenly crackled. It was Director Hayes on the other end. "Robert, this is Hayes. I've just received a call from Cedar County Sheriff's Office. Is everything all right out there? I'll take care of it from the state side. Just record everything. And Rob, I want her on camera." I faced the deputy and said, "I'm documenting all of this from now on. Just want that on the record." The deputy agreed, fair enough. Karen went red with anger. "Why are you recording me?" she demanded. I calmly replied, "Because you're interfering with a state-certified water facility, and that comes with a fine and possible jail time if you've tampered with anything." That's when the air shifted. One of the officers suddenly said something that changed everything. Mr. Walker, we could have a larger issue." I stood stock still. "What are you saying?" The deputy approached the tank, checked the lid, and grabbed a long wooden dowel that had been sitting next to it. It was wet. "Someone mess with your system, sir?" I slowly turned my head to face Karen. She took a step back and her eyes widened with alarm. I was just ensuring it wasn't boiling or leaking. "I did nothing," stuttered. Despite the denials, the evidence would not be denied. And what followed would totally alter the direction of this whole episode. Playing with a state-regulated water tank was no trivial prank, it was a federal crime. And I was prepared to make her pay for it. Before that happened though, I inquired, "Where are you watching from?" It's always so cool to see where everyone's listening from all over the US and the world. Karen stopped dead as the officer brandished the drippy stick like a smoking gun. Her condescending look dissolved. "I didn't touch anything," she stuttered. "I was just checking. I figured it could be leaking. What if it was harming the children?" I moved forward, firm but unruffled. "You handled a state-supervised water tank illegally, Karen. That's tampering. You might have tainted the whole emergency water system. Do you have any idea what you've done?" The deputy released the stick and faced me. "Mr. Walker, do you wish to make charges?" I didn't anticipate that question, so I was taken aback. Karen gasped. "I was attempting to help our community." I retorted, icily, "You mean your HOA? Let's not put on this act of concern for public health. This was all about control. You simply wanted to shut me down because I refused to join your little neighborhood club." I replied, "By dialing 911 on a legally inspected water supply and opening the tank yourself? If my tests come back tainted, that's your fault." One of the other cops jumped in. "Ma'am, just so you know, messing with state-inspected equipment is a criminal act, even if you live in an HOA. Karen blanched, but before we could go any further, the deputy's radio crackled. "Sheriff sent to Unit 9. County Water Safety Director just verified that the tank is owned by State Water Inspector Robert Walker and is listed as active emergency storage. All documents." The deputy turned to Karen, stating bluntly, "Ma'am, you made a false emergency call." Karen looked about, ready to faint. "It was a misunderstanding," she stammered. The officer held up his hand. "That's something you can tell down at the station. You're going to have to come with us for questioning." "I'm not under arrest," she screamed. "No, but we have the right to take you in for further investigation," the officer countered. Karen shot me a poisonous look, as if I had somehow masterminded the entire debacle. "You're a snake, Robert. You manipulated everyone." I crossed my arms and sat back to watch the scene unfold. "No, Karen, I simply enforced the law. Perhaps you should give it a try sometime." As the officers escorted her towards the cruiser, Karen turned abruptly about, screaming, "You think this is over? I am the HO, I have lawyers. I'll make your life miserable." I couldn't help but grin, which likely infuriated her even more than anything else. But that was merely the theatrical flair. Let's go back a little so you can get the whole picture. I wasn't ever confrontational. I was raised on the quiet hills of Wyoming, worked hard outdoors all day, and always tried to mind my own business. My dad taught me the loudest one in the room is usually the weakest, and I lived by that creed. I didn't shout, didn't fight unless I absolutely had to, but since I came to Cedar Valley, I was being pushed further than I wanted. When I first arrived at my ranch, everything was peaceful. The land was aged, but the well was robust, and the vista of the mountains from my porch made every morning dawn worth rising for. I gardened tomatoes, kept some chickens, and repaired the fence with my own 2 hands. But on the other side of the road, the land owned by HOA spread out like a spoiled child's empire: plastic lawns, coordinated mailboxes, and perpetual neighborhood hearsay newsletters. Cedar Heights was all I loathed about contemporary development. They even had sanctioned garbage can colors. Yes, that's correct. Garbage can colors. Not kidding. I was a loner in the early days. But then the regulations arrived. Karen appeared one day with a clipboard, looking at the little puff of smoke from my chimney. "I'm just reminding people that outside fires are prohibited because we have drought alerts," she stated. "I'm having a wood stove indoors," I explained. "Completely legal. I'm cooking on it. The odor carries," she stated, but I merely nodded and closed the door. Along comes a complaint about my tractor, which was too loud at 8 a.m. Then she complained about my scarecrow, that it was an eyesore to the children of the neighborhood. It was nothing more than a straw hat attached to a stick, but I didn't get back at her until the water tank episode. That was the last straw. The tank was not even visible from the road except if you leaned over the fence or trespassed, which Karen had done. She had said she had observed liquid boiling over the edge and odd pipes moving below ground. Everything was false. She wanted to get me in trouble, shut down, and coerced into complying with her HOA's requirements even though I did not reside in their area. That is when I realized I needed to document all this. I placed 3 unobtrusive cameras with night vision and a private cloud connectivity. The first aimed squarely at the tank, the second watched over the main gate, and the third recorded where Karen enjoyed standing by the road feigning stretch while spying. By the time she had called 911, I had everything I needed, including videos of her scaling the fence, prodding the tank with a stick, and yelling, "This will teach him to ignore me." Later that afternoon, after Karen was taken away by the officers, I called Director Hayes. "You won't believe what just occurred," I told him. Hayes laughed. "I read the county report. I believe it. Karen Lewis, huh? That name came up before," he continued. "She attempted to call in an irrigation system as a meth lab once." "Are you kidding me?" I laughed. "Dead serious," he replied. "She's notorious on a couple of HOA complaint websites. Do you want to press charges?" "You could, but I think let her sweat it out a little bit. Let it be a few days. She'll crawl back." I thanked him and hung up. Later that night I sat on my porch, gazing at stars hanging over the valley. It ought to have been serene, but my mind wouldn't stop working. Was it truly done? Would Karen quit now? Somehow I didn't think so. And I wasn't wrong. The next day I discovered something peculiar at my ranch gate, a handwritten letter, unsigned. The note said, "You think you're safe, but the HOA isn't finished with you yet. We have people. You'll regret embarrassing her." That's when I figured that it wasn't Karen anymore. She had people behind her, and they were getting ready to attack. I stood there, looking at the note. The writing was hasty, as if it had been written in rage. The note was crumpled up and taped to the gate post with flimsy clear tape. But what sent shivers down my spine wasn't the content of the note, it was that someone had invaded my property in the middle of the night. I looked out onto the road, dust and morning sunlight only. My chickens cheeped in the back of the barn, and my windmill groaned quietly in the wind. It all seemed perfectly ordinary, but something didn't seem right. I brought the note inside, put on my glasses, and read it again. "You think you're safe, but the HOA isn't finished with you yet. We have people. You'll regret embarrassing her." I folded it up neatly, put it into a plastic bag, and looked at the cameras. The system had picked up motion at 2:43 a.m. The picture was grainy, but I could see someone coming to the gate. They wore a hoodie and gloves and had their face pointed downward. But the headlights of an automobile for a moment flashed on behind them, and I saw one key thing: a Cedar Heights parking permit on the windshield. I wasn't merely dealing with Karen anymore. I was up against the whole HOA board, or at least her friends, perhaps even enforcers. That morning I drove directly to the sheriff's office and turned over the note and footage. The duty deputy, Officer Trent, assured me he would keep an eye out. "She's getting reckless," he said. "We'll increase patrols around your house, but keep your eyes open, Mr. Walker." "I always do," I said. Subsequently, at the farmer's co-op down the street, I was replenishing pipes, fittings, and a new lock system for the water tank lid when I heard someone say my name. Miss Carla, my neighbor and friend from the sunflower field down the hill, called out to me. She came to me with an expression of concern. "Did Karen report you to the cops on your tank?" "True," I replied. "They arrived like I had a covert lab." Carla groaned. "She's getting out of hand. People are gossiping." "What people?" I inquired. "HOA members," she said softly. "Karen's been telling people you threatened her, that you're operating an unlicensed farm in your water tank. She says you're disrupting the balance of the valley, whatever that means." I nodded my head in disbelief. "None of that's true. Carla spoke softly. I know, but she's roping others into it now. He from Lot 3, he's a member of the board. He said they're seeking loopholes to have the county close you down. Loopholes such as water use codes, fence setbacks, even soil runoff. I burst out laughing miserably. They want to invoke the same water laws I helped draft to have me evicted? That takes guts. Carla put a comforting hand on my arm. You're not alone. If you ever need assistance, I've got your back. I smiled at her gratefully. Thanks, Carla. If the HOA was going to fight with the truth, they'd made a terrible mistake. Not only was I a state water inspector, but I knew someone in every department from county zoning to environmental protection. They were attempting to bury me under paperwork, but I had a trail of paper that could bury them instead. That night I petitioned for a protective use certification for my ranch water tank. This official action raised the status of my tank from a routine inspection to priority infrastructure. Tampering with my tank now had stiffer penalties, and it would set off a red flag in any agency that received complaints against me. Do not act without state consultation. I also sent a formal cease and desist letter to the Cedar Heights HOA board, requiring them to cease and desist from trespassing, cease and desist from photographing my property, and cease and desist from making false accusations. Undefined. But just when I thought I was making progress, the HOA hit me again. 2 days after that, there was a white SUV with county tags in my driveway. A man who looked like he was in his mid-20s wearing a bright orange vest got out and grabbed a clipboard. Mr. Walker? He hollered as I came down from the porch. Yes? Replied. I'm Cody Peterson with County Zoning. I'm here to conduct a spot inspection on your property. We received a complaint that you may be in non-compliance with the runoff code. I arched an eyebrow. Runoff code? That's a first. I looked at his form. He was shaking his head. Anonymous complaint reports your tank could be releasing untreated water onto the hillside, leading to erosion, maybe endangering adjacent residences. I couldn't help but laugh. I gestured for him to come along. You mean Karen's house? He snapped his head up. This has been set aside for official consideration. I simply need to check the area out. I headed him around the barn to the tank. The pipe was capped, the valve wasn't even hooked up to the ground, just the main irrigation line. Undefined, there was no discharge. Looks good to me, Cody replied. Undefined. Actually one of the neatest setups I've ever seen. Undefined. Want to see the permits? Undefined. I already pulled them before I came in. Let me guess, this isn't your first rodeo with Karen, I said, looking at him knowingly. He laughed. Nope. She at one point in time actually complained about a tree, said it was leaning in an aggressive fashion. I giggled. What happened? He nodded at me with a smile. Sorry you're having to deal with this, Mr. Walker. If it makes it any better, I'll be submitting a false complaint notice to the board. Maybe the system did function at times. But Karen was not finished. That evening I caught someone else on my camera, this one sneaking around the back of the barn. They did not attempt to enter the tank. No. They sliced the tires on my water trailer and spray-painted HOA and order on the side of my barn. I glared at the video in stunned silence. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was harassment, vandalism, war, and I was finished playing nice. The following morning, I arose with fire in my belly. Spray-painting my barn? Cutting the tires on my water trailer? That wasn't HOA pranks, it was criminal intimidation, and I wasn't going to let them rattle the bear anymore. Having fed the chickens and temporarily secured the mangled trailer with a lock, I took a seat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started typing the type of email that can make blood run cold. Subject: urgent request for full audit, Cedar Heights HOA to State Department of Environmental Quality, Office of Compliance CC, County Supervisor, Regional Water Safety Office, District Attorney's Office. Dear colleagues, this is Robert Walker, credentialed Regional Water Inspector, Badge W32. I am asking that there be a formal investigation and environmental compliance audit of Cedar Heights HOA, Cedar Valley County. The reason for this is as follows: continuing harassment by HOA members after a legally approved emergency water tank installation. Fabricated emergency 911 calls reporting chemical storage and environmental threats. HOA member trespassing and tampering with state-credentialed equipment. Current property destruction such as vandalism of tires and spray painting HOA-connected messages. From observation in my line of work and first-hand experience, I have grounds to suspect Cedar Heights HOA is also abusing water use restrictions, irrigation permits, and environmental runoff regulations in their development. Camera footage files, audio records, incident reports, and official permit documents are attached for reference. I am willing to provide sworn testimony and technical advice. Sincerely, Robert Walker, State Water Inspector, Cedar Valley Division 1. Press send. And that was the turning point. Within hours, I heard back subject request for full audit, Cedar Heights, HOA. Mr. Walker, thank you for bringing this to our attention. By noon, the sheriff's department had sent an officer to make a felony vandalism report for the graffiti and the slashed tires. It didn't take long for them to connect the vandalism to Cedar Heights. The spray paint matched a previous HOA clubhouse tagging case from 2 years ago done by the same group of teenagers Karen had hired for beautification projects. The sheriff wasn't happy. "You're not the only one who's had run-ins with them," Officer Trent muttered as he snapped pictures of the damage. "But you're the first one with a badge and camera footage to back it up." I looked at the fresh red spray paint on my barn. It dripped in thick streaks, a stark reminder of the lengths Karen and her HOA would go to. Let's see how they like it when the state brings the heat. 3 days later, the inspection team arrived. 3 white SUVs pulled onto my ranch road. Inside were state auditors, environmental officers, and a single investigator from the ethics board. I welcomed them at the gate, clipboard in hand. "Welcome to Walker Ranch." "Right on time." "Mr. Walker," one of the inspectors said, offering his hand. "We've looked over your evidence. Quite a quandary you have here." I nodded. "You haven't met Karen yet." We walked for hours through all areas of my property. I pointed out the water tank, the irrigation pipes, my permits, and the vandalism. I ran the security video of the evening of the tire slashing. By the time we finished the tour, they were shaking their heads. "Your operation's textbook legal," one of them said, "and your papers airtight. We've never had anyone this well prepared." "That's what 30 years of government inspection will do to you," I shrugged. The ethics board investigator leaned in. "Would you be available to testify at an HOA ethics violation hearing?" "With pleasure," I said. Word leaked quickly. By morning, Cedar Heights was in full panic mode. HOA members whispered behind the gate, and the community WhatsApp chat leaked screenshots of Karen furiously denying she was involved. She wrote a message stating, "This is an overreaction. He had this coming. We were defending the neighborhood." But others weren't accepting it anymore. And what they discovered made Karen's allegations sound ridiculous. It soon became apparent that the HOA had been silently redirecting runoff from their man-made ponds into a long dry creek bed, a bed that hadn't even been inspected in years. The runoff poured into an uncontrolled area behind their homes, perilously close to adjacent roads. More concerning still, they had an illegal irrigation system pumping twice the lawfully allowed water rate to maintain their front yards green during drought season. The group also found out that Karen had made more than a dozen complaints on the HOA funds without approval from the board. Some of them were even forged in the names of board members. That's when the HOA board turned against Karen. Pete Lott III organized an emergency meeting. The members voted 8-1 to suspend Karen as HOA president pending legal scrutiny. She shouted, labeling it a witch hunt, claiming she was being punished for standing up for what was right. No one applauded for her that day. Butter the wound, I thought the storm had passed. A black SUV drove up to my ranch gate that weekend. A man in a gray suit got out, clipboard in hand. He wasn't from the sheriff or the state. He was with a private development company. "I am with Sandmark Group," he stated, holding out his hand. "We financed a great deal of Cedar Heights." I nodded warily. "Okay." Me then leaned forward. "We'd like to offer you a deal, one that I hope you'll take very seriously." "What sort of offer?" I asked. He grinned, his voice silky. "We'd like to purchase your property. Full fair market value and a nice bonus, 50% over appraisal. It'll eliminate the HOA issues. We'll handle it and you'll have a do-over." I laughed again, icy and hard. "You really believe this is about money?" "Everyone has a price, Mr. Walker." I shook my head. "Clearly you have no idea who I am." He pressed a business card into the palm of my hand. "Anyway, think it over. There were larger hands at work here and they had only begun." I glared at the shiny business card on my kitchen counter, black letters taunting me. Richard Fields, Regional Director, Sandmark Group. He believed that I was merely some retired rancher holding on to a dry plot of earth. He didn't know that this ranch wasn't merely land for me. It was a heritage. It was mine. I had sacrificed blood, sweat, and years to restore it to its former state. No sum of money could undo the integrity of what they were attempting. They weren't merely attempting to buy me out. They were attempting to force me out. And that could mean only one thing: I needed to fight harder. The next morning, I trudged outside to my barn, still with the faint red scarring of Karen's spray paint. I hadn't washed it off entirely. I wanted it there, like a brand, a reminder of what this struggle had turned into. I took my camera and walked out to the border at Cedar Heights property where it backed into the creek bed. The inspectors had marked the runoff area. And there it was. Thin lines of polluted water seeping under their decorative rock fencing running down into the hill. Dead grass lines indicated the direction of the flow of the water, and plastic irrigation hoses ran along the ground covered up beneath mulch. They were still pumping, still desecrating after all that investigation. I shot photo after photo, documenting evidence, timestamps, angles, flow of water. It was no longer HOA hubris. It was environmental abdication. By nightfall, I was at the county courthouse, filing a formal environmental hazard report on my own authority. Being a certified state inspector, my results mandated an automatic 14-day compliance audit pursuant to state statute. That meant one thing: the HOA had 2 weeks to fix the runoff issue or face heavy state fines. And knowing Karen and her cronies, they'd panic hard. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Pete from Lot 3, yes, the same Pete who had turned against Karen, showed up at my gate. He was sweating, holding a white envelope. "Just make this stop," he told me. Placing it in my hand, he opened the envelope. Within was a formal apology letter from the HOA board along with a settlement proposal. They asked me to forego all grievances and sign a peace treaty. In return, they agreed to permanently relinquish all HOA interest in my ranch and send out a public correction letter. I rested against the gate and stared Pete straight in the eye. "This isn't about peace now. This is about truth." He took a deep breath, looked remorseful. "We were just doing what she was doing, Rob. We didn't want any trouble. And here we are," I said, shaking the envelope in my hand. "I voted against her. Doesn't that mean anything?" I raised an eyebrow, then added, "Prove it. Help with the state audit. Tell the truth. No backroom deals." He stood there ashamed, then slowly nodded. "I'll testify." "Good. One down." I was having a coffee on my porch and gazing up at the stars when I noticed action toward my southern fence line across from the HOA side. It wasn't Karen or her regular crew this time, strangers. 3 of them, flashlights in hand, trotting along the edges, deliberately trespassing. I lit up my floodlights and bellowed, "You're on private property. Get out now or I'll call the sheriff." They ran quickly, but I got something crucial: the name of the company on the back of one of their shirts, Cedar Surveyors LLC. That was a development company within Sandmark Group. So, this was the next step in the operation. They were surveying my property without asking, attempting to discover a loophole in zoning, a boundary miscalculation, anything they could use to intimidate me legally. It wasn't HOA harassment anymore. It was corporate takeover strategies. I took up my rifle, not to fire it, but to clean it in full view. Then I phoned my lawyer, Gary. "I need to make a trespass report and have a cease and desist letter delivered to Sandmark tomorrow morning." "You sure you're ready for this?" Gary queried. "They're playing hardball now." The Cedar Valley Chronicle, the local newspaper, ran an article called "HOA Harassment or Land Grab. Ranch Owner Fights Back." The results of the audit had been leaked by someone in the county courthouse. In it, they explained how Cedar Heights had quietly been violating several environmental codes, and how HOA President Karen had made false calls on a retired state water inspector who would not sell. The story went viral. Locals flooded the comment sections with support. HOA corruption is everywhere. Glad someone finally stood up to them. Even better, one of the paper's editors reached out and asked if I'd be willing to tell my side in a full interview. "People are rooting for you," she said. "They want to hear your voice." I agreed. And when the interview was published, everything changed. Karen went out of public sight. Sandmark Group's attorney phoned my attorney and offered to triple their initial buyout. We refused. Then arrived the biggest surprise so far. The State Ethics Board brought official charges against Karen Lewis for abuse of power, misuse of state funds, and harassment of a shielded government official. She was prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership role in the state for 10 years. Her face was in the headlines everywhere. HOA Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of Cedar Heights, now nothing more than an embarrassed, overreaching bully who attempted to take down a rancher and lost. But even in triumph, I knew it wasn't quite finished. 1 week later, I got one last letter. No return address. Typed. Brief. It stated, "You may have won this battle, but this valley is shifting. We're still on our way. You can't keep resisting forever. Congratulations, you may have won this time, but this valley is evolving. We're coming. You can't resist for all eternity." I folded it and placed it in the same file with Karen's original message, closing it in the drawer. So that's how they wanted to play it. Not with lawsuits. Not with another phony emergency. With threats. They weren't coming for just my ranch anymore. They were coming for everything in and around it, the land, the valley, the history. I reached for the phone and dialed the one person I hadn't called yet, Evelyn Carter, an environmental journalist from Colorado who'd written an award-winning article about farmland preservation in the state. "Rob Walker," she replied, her voice crisp and warm. "Heard of you. You're sort of a hero around here." "Then I'm going to need your help to keep the light shining," I said to her. I told her everything, not only about Karen but Sandmark, the nighttime surveyors, the trespassing, the threats couched in subtlety. She didn't skip a beat. "I'll meet you at the ranch tomorrow." The following morning, Evelyn appeared in dusty boots and a faded denim jacket, notebook at the ready. She was efficient, concise, and missed nothing. We strolled the land side by side. I introduced her to the tank, the cameras, the spray paint, and the letter. "You get what they're doing here, don't you?" she asked. "This valley is the last available area between their new Cedar Heights development and their eastward development plan. Once they own this land, they'll connect the subdivisions and double their property value in one night. And your ranch is right in the middle." "Bullseye," she said. She glanced around, then took a photo of the dilapidated windmill creaking overhead. "You prepared for national publicity, Rob?" "I'm ready for anything that protects this land." She smiled. "Then let's give them a story they can't bury." Within a week's time, Evelyn had written an in-depth feature for several papers entitled "The Ranch That Wouldn't Sell: How One Man Stopped a Corporate Land Grab in Cedar Valley." It set the world ablaze. Television news teams descended. Emails streamed in from all over the state. I even got a note in the mail from an office of a congressman commending my actions and asking for more information on Sandmark's strategies, although not everyone was pleased. The following morning I awoke to the cacophony of chainsaws. Not on my land but just beyond it, across the fence where the creek bed met the HOA land. I fled to the ridge, my heart racing, and what I saw froze me. Sandmark contractors were clear-cutting trees along the water's edge, gorgeous old oaks, dozens of them. Bulldozers in line, chainsaws screaming, orange tape covering the whole stretch along the creek, land that hadn't been disturbed in generations. And in front of it all, giving instructions, was Richard Fields, the same person who'd attempted to purchase me out. I stomped down to the fence line and shouted, "Hey, this is protected land. What in the world are you doing?" Richard spun around, unruffled. "We're clearing a new trail system," he explained, loudly enough for his crew to overhear. "Public. Project approved by the HOA." I should have known better. That's not a trail system. It's clearing for a connector road, a means of extending Cedar Heights beyond me, around me, to connect with their other developments that are in the works. Boundaries are not so rigid when no one is there to enforce them. Bad thing to say. Because I took out my phone and called both the Environmental Quality Hotline and the County Wildlife Bureau. In less than 30 minutes they were there, sirens, rangers, county zoning officials, and Richard. He was made to stop the project in its tracks. Turns out the oak grove they were tearing down was habitat protected under the 1998 Land Preservation Act. They had bypassed formal review thinking no one would catch on. But someone did. Me. Later that night, as the sun set low over the valley, I knew the battle wasn't yet over, but I was prepared for whatever lay ahead. I sat on the hood of my pickup truck, looking at the damage that had been begun and left unfinished. The grove would recover in time, but the damage was done. Behind me stood the water tank, still looming large. Meanwhile, Evelyn's tale was being reported by news programs throughout the state. But I wasn't sleeping so well. That evening, someone came by in a car and fired into my mailbox. The noise was loud, piercing, and intended to intimidate me. But it was an error. I had already installed a fourth camera and it recorded it all: the vehicle, the license plate, the driver's face. It wasn't random vandalism, it was a Sandmark truck, and the driver was one of their junior surveyors. The sheriff's department moved quickly. This time they had full state backing. An arrest warrant was issued, and the charges, destruction of property and intimidation in connection with the land disputes, were explained. Protesters gathered outside the Cedar Heights clubhouse, demanding Sandmark be banned from any future valley developments. State senators spoke out, and the Department of Land Resources launched a full investigation into Sandmark's operations. Richard Fields resigned within 48 hours. Karen remained silent, but I wasn't done yet. Standing on my porch that evening and seeing the moon rise above the earth, I knew there was one more thing I had to do, and I did it. I submitted a request to the State Historical Registry to make Walker Ranch an official protected site, immune from any kind of commercial development. The process would be arduous, but if it worked, this land would be inviolate. They might construct their roundabouts, suburbs, and sidewalks, but never own this land, not ever. I stood in front of the old barn, papers in my hand, ink still wet. My application was in. Each waterline, fence post, and piece of land that I had saved now rested under consideration to be safeguarded forever. If the petition was granted, Sanmark couldn't set foot on a grain of sand here, but they understood what this implied and they weren't going to remain quiet about it. That evening I heard the tires grinding on gravel once again. I did not stir. I merely switched on the porch light and leaned against my cane. I did not have a gun, but I had the cameras, I had the law, and most significantly I had nothing further to lose. The SUV sat for a few moments before it departed. No assault, merely a reminder that they were still present. But here's the catch, so too were everybody else now. 3 days later I received an invitation to the state capitol to make my presentation to the registry committee. I put on my nicest denim jacket and pressed pants and had a folder with photos, blueprints, and ancient family records establishing that the ranch wasn't only mine, it was rooted in county history. Standing amidst a sea of suited officials, my voice firm, I proclaimed, "This ranch has been part of Cedar Valley before Cedar Heights ever came into being. The water pipes, the windmill system, the irrigation canals, they're all intact remnants of pioneer regional farming." I delivered photos of my grandfather's stamped copper fittings and a letter he penned after the 1958 flood. "This isn't land," I told them. "This is heritage, and it's time we quit peddling our heritage to the highest bidder." One of them, a gray-haired woman with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward and told me, "Mr. Walker, your file is the most comprehensive we've ever gotten." I nodded. "I know how it works. I trained many of your inspectors." She smiled. We noticed. At home, things started to settle down. Karen was kept out of sight, her name now sullied in the HOA newsletter. She was replaced by another older man, Dennis, who made a public apology, assuring the HOA would never call me again. Sanmark also withdrew their whole Cedar Valley crew and suspended all their outstanding projects in the area. Suits by other homeowners began to pour in folks who had been deceived or told out-and-out lies. One afternoon, as I worked fixing the gate, the telephone rang. It was Monica Reyes, Chief of Environmental Quality in the division. "I've got good news," she told me. I took a deep breath. "The Historical Registry approved your application. Walker Ranch is officially on the list of protected heritage sites." I let out a heavy breath, my knees all but collapsing. I sat down on the grass. It was over. They would never be able to touch this land again, not the HOA, or Sanmark, or anyone else. 2 weeks later, a plaque came in the mail. Walker Ranch, established 1948, officially designated a historical preservation site. I hammered it into the barn proudly, directly below the streaked red paint Karen had abandoned there. I wanted everyone to remember how close we came to losing something priceless, and how far we were willing to go to protect it. Things shifted over the months. Evelyn's story became a textbook in legal circles. The rancher and the developers, how law, legacy, and loyalty prevailed. I began offering guest lectures in community halls, educating fellow landowners about how to defend their land with the help of existing legislation. Carla, my sunflower farming neighbor, organized a land watch team of fellow farmers. Even Pete from Lot 3 came aboard after quitting the HOA and blowing the whistle on Karen's deeds. Karen? She simply slipped away. The house was sold and she vanished without a word, like a bad memory that finally left town. I was sitting on the porch one night, the same old coffee mug in my hand. The windmill groaned quietly and the chickens roosted at dusk. All I could hear from afar was the soothing hum of the valley. Then a young couple drove up to my gate. The man had work boots on and the woman had a toddler in her arms. "Are you Mr. Walker?" the man said. "That's me," I said. "We purchased a small parcel of land east of the creek," he stated. "We heard what you did and we just wanted to express our gratitude. You saved this place." I smiled and glanced at the child sleeping on her mother's shoulder. "Good," I said. "See that she grows up to know what not to let happen." He nodded. "Yes, sir, we will." They departed, leaving me with a warm pie, a thank you letter, and a handshake worth more to me than money ever could. And here I am today, Robert Walker, ex-state water inspector, present-day rancher, and full-time guardian of this land. I never set out to be a symbol. I never had the intention to fight a war. But when the phony emergency call attempted to destroy my ranch, when the HOA pushed the limits, when Sanmark believed they could push an old man off his land, they made one huge mistake. This land doesn't give in. And neither do I. Where are you watching from? Leave your location in the comments. And remember, sometimes you don't need a badge to stand up for what's right. You just need courage.